Okay, so I thought I would today try to talk a little bit about that video called Theory of Everything, and I will post a link to it down below. A couple people had asked me why I had favorited it, and I did want to follow up on it. I thought it was a really fascinating video for so many reasons. I I don't feel comfortable talking about, some of the larger, physics of the piece. I mean, some of it I just want to say, well, I don't feel qualified or competent to talk about it. And I'm a little uncomfortable. There are parts of it that I didn't particularly like, especially the sort of formula for consciousness. I guess some of that I thought was a little odd. But let me say if I can, let me see if I can say some things about what it was that made that video for me anyway, one really worth watching and one that people should check out and study. And maybe we could get a little bit of a dialogue or a discussion going on about it. One of the things that I think is first a real merit of the piece is that it has text all the way through. It has the images and the person speaking, and so it has like three levels of conveying messages, right? I mean, it has the person saying it, it has the text, and then it has accompanying graphics and images. I thought that was really just great. I think the other thing that really stands out is its attempt to try to integrate something like an orientation toward harmony and balance across multiple scales of analysis. And so the example would be, first would be this issue of cognitive dissonance, which of all psychological theories, I personally think, cognitive dissonance, Leon Festinger was a fascinating person, the originator of cognitive dissonance theory. And cognitive dissonance theory is really one of the most powerful and potent um, psychological theories. And to take cognitive dissonance and then move it out of just internal neuronal systems or internal brain states and then move it into larger social political concerns with how we deal with confirmation and disconfirmation and the need for self-esteem, and how there's I guess thalamic defense mechanism that comes again, wipes out part of your memory at certain points. And it does there's a sense in which we defend our beliefs and our thoughts as if our bodily integrity is being attacked. And so there is something there that, again, is interesting. Then the fact that he pushes that forward and talks about the way cognitive dissonance then gets, I guess, activated by mirror neurons in social interaction, and this what he calls superorganismal, the sort of superorganismal identity, where people start to realize that there isn't consciousness, quotes, within a brain. If anything, there are neuronal firing patterns that are some way ongoingly resonating with the larger environment, which also includes other people's neuronal firing patterns. I mean, in some way, my my sense of myself and the world is not an individual product of a deep self or a deep down identity. It's some sort of socio-historical negotiated process that's ongoing through time. And again, so I thought that, again, one of the real strengths there, this issue of the origin of, or the development of empathy and of empathetic neurons and normative socialization as that goes on. I think all that's just, again, really right-minded to try to address all the ways that the self is not internal and the environment is not external. Those, again, from my perspective, are very right-minded, and it is very nuanced, right? I think this is part of this problem that, we do have something like a bodily self, at least for practical purposes. I mean, if we didn't, then why would we get defensive? See, I mean, I think this is part of the equivocation in the video. The video wants to suggest, well, that some of these identity, perceiving things through an identity, it creates a kind of a problem, but yeah, it seems like that's happening neurophysiologically. Now, you could say, well, no, that can be recalibrated by certain beliefs. Okay, so now let's get to where I guess it gets interesting for me, or some of the problems that I have with it. First off, is again, I don't feel that competent to talk about all these sort of larger questions. I found it interesting, the thought of trying to take cognitive dissonance theory and then work that into, I guess, problems of balance and harmony at cosmological level and at quantum level. It's fascinating. It really is fascinating, and I think the fact of bias in beliefs and how people can get very defensive. I think it is interesting that this video tries to do what Einstein and Bohr were unable to do, which is bring their students into some sort of dialogue about the possibilities of a unified theory of everything. So I thought that itself was kind of interesting. Going back to this issue, what are some of the problems with it, though? I do think there is a problem in that the video kind of gives this rosy, it's all, not that there really is no, not that it's all one consciousness, but it's kind of like, consciousness can't be located anywhere. It's not a simple substance that we can find, but I guess it kind of under assesses the problem of individuation, of the way we do have brains that to some extent are isolated off from other people, right? I mean, we do have a sense of being separate from others, even though in many regards we're always connected with them. And you get at this centerlessness, maybe a different way, is you know, at about 17 minutes or almost 18 minutes, it kind of oddly moves toward this claim that we need to get beyond the yearning for a story of origins or some kind of myth that would ground people in an identity, and we need to realize that we don't need a story. What we need is the truth, and the truth is about something like consciousness being interconnected with, I guess, a larger unity, a kind of a social consciousness, this neuroplasticity, centerlessness, and it's sort of shot throughout the larger environment, the unity with it, but shot throughout it. But it seems odd to say that we don't really need a narrative because this person is basically providing a narrative. And you can see the narrative element comes up even further. Now, in the video, very early on, it's about maybe the end of 5 minutes or so, the person says, that some of these contradictions can come to a head in the sense of cognitive dissonance, at least neurophysiologically, can come to a head when an organism contemplates how it can be finite and yet, I guess, contemplate some question like how does it relate to all that is, and he uses the phrase, the video uses the phrase, why or what am I? And when you start to, and it equivocates there, because I think that the video kind of addresses what am I? Well, what am I? I'm this centerless, non-localizable, ongoing state of consciousness that's unfolding through time. But then the question becomes again of time, of time and a direction, the arrow of time, and the sense in which there does seem to be something like an arrow. And it's interesting that how much of this video doesn't address it, but there are problems of the history of communication technologies throughout it. I mean, not only are there various questions about the actual emergence of mirrors in cultures and the role that mirrors play in promoting self-awareness, and there's all of this kind of stuff, but literacy and different forms of communication technologies, conditioning, that is, being the condition of the environment that brings about these changes that are possible through neuroplasticity. But it's the left to right streaming, the role of alphabetacy and numeracy throughout it, and this arrow of time that occurs about 40 minutes and 28 seconds or so in the video. It reinforces this issue of narrative and the question of the larger narrative unity and what it is, or even better, why it is. And when we start to raise this question of why is there an ongoing unity, you know, I guess I'm left saying I don't think you're going to get out of some need for narrative. I mean, to just go, no, all we need is the facts here. It seems like that's just going to kind of miss it. If the overall point, though, is that people need to really challenge their notion of self, that they need to get rid of some of the very problematic, dogmatic, called attachments to ego and attachments to identity that lead a person into confusion, internal contradiction. I think there is a lot of dissonance that people suffer, and they suffer from dissonance because they believe in the atomistic individual, of the individual totally isolated from the larger world, or even the individual isolated off from collective relations, and the need to negotiate beliefs and ideas and thoughts. It's one thing to, I guess, feel the dissonance that occurs when you're moving through the view of personal identity and people being separate, but there does seem to be a kind of transformation and a, I guess, a refocusing of energies, an opening up of capacities when we're able to reflectively, I guess, detach from some of those uh, identity orientations or ego orientations, and and I guess feel ourselves. I mean, I don't know what the word is. I mean, I think it's partly a belief system, but there is a sense in which I think we feel ourselves to be more connected, more integrated into the larger world than some belief systems, at least in the contemporary popular world, would lead us to believe. Again, it's really hard to talk about the video. I think, it's a long video. It's all over the place. I do think that if people are interested in it, I'd be happy to talk more about it. I think it's so hard to just summarize it. I think if I were going to summarize it, in a nutshell, it's that I appreciate people who attempt to try to deal with psychological, sociological, and then physical and metaphysical issues of balance and harmony, and how things like charges and the balancing of charges is, I don't know, it has a summative experiential quality to it, even though it's, arguably something, again, that happens at lots of different levels. I think many people would say, well, why would one think that what's happening at the cosmological level and at the quantum level in some way is related to what's going on in our brains and in between brains, and sort of like, around the, I guess, the environment, uh, wholesale. And I think the point would be, well, that's kind of why you want a theory of everything. Okay, so those are just some thoughts. Thanks.